This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
After 18 years on air, Q&A was axed, and so was the project, which has been on air for 16 years. I'm not sure how we're going to cope not having these two insufferable lefty talkfests lecturing us on what a terrible, racist, sexist, heteronormative country Australia is.
We're stuck with the hosts of Chapo Shithouse podcast.
Serious danger to Australia.
All right, listeners, welcome to Serious Danger, a podcast about green politics in Australia, produced by Michael the Griffin. This is not an official Greens Party podcast, but I am your favourite green hack, Emerald Moon. This week, Tom is having a break, so I'm joined by a very special guest co-host, Admin 1 of the Toilet Paper Australia account, Raushaan Seychell. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's I've listened to you guys for a while and keen to jump on.
Just quickly, how many admins are there? Like, how do you get to be admin number one and not 2 or 3 or?
Yeah, so it was just me for about I'd say the first 4 years of it, and then we have another 3 other people working on it. Yeah, got a co-host, designer, and producer who do some amazing work with me as well. They've been on it since more or less just over a year now, and yes, there's 4 of us running this operation.
But you're the boss. That's why you're admin 1.
Yeah, more or less.
We'll say that. I'm podcast co-host number 1, Emerald Moon. Look, this week on the show, we're talking about TPA, how it started, why it started, and how you think we can kind of do political communication better with people who are apolitical or anti-political even. And then we're checking in on a little-known story that kind of flew under the radar this week. We're talking about Iran, Israel, and the US bombings. Not much coverage of that, so we're going to be the only podcast covering that this week. Quick plug, before we get into it, some housekeeping for the Patreon. We have a Patreon. That is how we run the show. That's how we pay our producer the Griff's wages and keep it running. It's at patreon.com/seriousdangerau. It's $3 a month to subscribe, and you not only help keep the show going, but you also get access to bonus content. We put out a bonus episode every 2 weeks. Sometimes we're reading Inside the Greens, our favourite book. Sometimes we're doing little deep dives. This week we just released a Patreon episode that's a little special snippet from our live show in Meanjin, Brisbane, where we did a bit of a deep dive into what the hell One Nation is up to. What's Pauline Hanson doing? So that's a bit of fun. You can listen to that now if you are subscribed to the Patreon. And thank you to Machine, who signed up in the last week. Thanks for supporting the show. And finally, I also did want to give a shout out on a slightly sadder note to the Newcastle, Lake Macquarie and Greens New South Wales comrades. They lost a comrade last week with the shock death of Newcastle Greens councillor Sinéad Francis-Coan. She was just 40. Here she was at the live show, the Serious Danger live show in Newcastle last year for Rising Tide. She's been a really hardworking councillor. She's an activist, Greens volunteer for many years. So just sending our love from Serious Danger to her family and to everyone who's grieving her passing. Vale, Sinéad.
Hey everybody, I'm here with Zoran in a hot day in Crown.
Extremely hot.
Very hot. It's Tuesday, it's our last chance, and we really need young men, guys in their 30s and 40s who still listen to podcasts to come out and turn this against. I can't listen to Andrew Cuomo ever again. We gotta stop this guy and the billionaires that are trying to take podcasts away from us. That's what they're gonna do.
And then maybe to pivot to some good news, 33-year-old socialist Zaran Mamdani is the Democratic Party's candidate for the New York mayoralty after winning the primary this week.
Yes,
fuck yeah.
Phenomenal, honestly.
So sick.
Incredible to see.
Have you followed his campaign much?
Only in sort of the closing stages.
Yeah.
Hadn't really heard much about him, but it's interesting seeing his campaign and seeing, I guess, just how far I'm a pessimist with US politics, just how far gone US political discussion is. Like, the state is shocking, and he would be, the benchmark for a pretty stock standard, maybe Greens candidate, or maybe a Labor left candidate in Australia. And well, I mean, he's viewed as considerably extreme, but a lot of the stuff he's saying is like a lot of just normal suburban Australians would probably relate to. I think the thing that stood out for me was that it was a massive controversy when they were going on about like, oh, what would be the first foreign country you visit? He's the fucking New York mayor. He's a local councillor. Like,
yeah.
How is this a big deal?
Were they trying to push on, are you going to go to Israel?
I think so.
Yeah.
And they're going for like, is no one, like everyone's arguing about the ins and outs of, you know, whether or not he should be saying that. But are we stopping to think, why is anyone asking him this question?
Yeah,
Isn't this just a bullshit question? And then he's like, well, I'm going to visit New York because I represent New York. And I think most Australians will be like, oh, yeah, fair enough. Like
reasonable. Reasonable.
I don't think, like, I feel like a mayor of a major city isn't a foreign dignitary. Like, they're not a dignitary to a foreign country. Like, they represent, he's doing the right thing. So I think it's a massive win. I think what he's proposing, and I think actually being one of the more progressive candidates the Democrats have put forward, I think is a fantastic thing. And the Democrats have shot themselves in the foot by not doing so. And I think maybe they're starting to, well, hopefully, starting to see the writing on the wall.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, like as a socialist, and a lot of the listeners of this podcast are socialists, like that's the really exciting thing is he openly identifies as a socialist. He ran on a platform, really quite a transformative, radical platform, including things like rent freezes for people in rent-controlled apartments in New York, free public transport, and openly supporting a free Palestine. This is the other thing, you know, obviously the underlying narrative or the story behind people pushing him so hard on things like, are you going to visit Israel, is because he's a Muslim man. And there was a lot of Islamophobia, I think, directed towards him during this campaign. And his opponents, you know, Andrew Cuomo had, significant institutional backing, but he ran this campaign based around door knocking and, kind of a grassroots, the kind of campaign that the Greens have been trying to run, and I think we've had a few setbacks. Obviously, the Greens have had a bruising few months, and for us socialists to look over there, I see a lot of people, some hope returning to our hearts with that. Yeah. And, you know, I totally agree with President Donald Trump, who posted on Truth Social, I believe, that this is, quote, a big moment in the history of our country.
Yeah.
He said some other things, but yeah, totally agree. Incredible. Yeah, socialism can win.
Yeah, maybe the least, I think that's probably the only sensible thing he's maybe said all week. So yes. Based on what he said on Truth Social, it looks like an angry man writing complaint letters. It's like that episode in The Simpsons. I did a meme about it yesterday where it's like,
Dear Mr. President, there are too many states nowadays. Please eliminate 3. I am not a crackpot.
Dear Israel, there are too many nukes. Please remove 3. P.S. I'm not a crackpot. It's like Grandpa Simpson doing that. And it's like, when you think about it, you're like, no, fuck, this is the guy that he's the guy with his finger on the big red button right now.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I do think it's a fantastic moment. I think just making it a normal thing to discuss things like that. And that's kind of what Bernie did back in 2016.
Yes, yes. And Bernie was backing Zoran's campaign
whether or not he won
yeah.
or lost. I mean, it would have been great if he won, but I think it all comes back to the fact that the stuff that they're talking about really is it's things that are going to help everyone, and it makes at least Americans think, well, actually doesn't need to be this way.
Yeah, better things are possible.
And I think that's a good thing, because in a place like America where you've got 2 parties winning 98% of the popular vote, is insane. And that change is going to come, and it's going to look like this to start. They're going to be very small wins, but they're going to be very visible wins.
Yeah, that was one thing actually that I didn't look at closely, but I noticed that the Democratic primary in this instance, they used ranked choice voting, like they used preferential voting, which obviously they don't use in US elections. Is that a new thing? And did that potentially help Zaran win, do you reckon?
I think it is, because I mean it seemed to be a really big deal when they were talking about it. I think it's quite new. Don't quote me on that. But I think, you know, preferential voting, I've always been of the opinion that it's the greatest system in the world in terms of, individual candidates. And I think in America, I think that, and it's like, this is a good thing. And it just, again, it just brings everything into question. Maybe the Electoral College, first past the post, really everything in America can now finally start to be on the table when it comes to the electoral system there and how deeply rooted certain things are in the states.
Yeah.
I think it's good. Everything's on the table.
Yeah, it's exciting. It is exciting. The mayoral election is in November, I believe.
Yes.
The candidate who Zaran defeated, Mamdani defeated Cuomo, may run as an independent, and I think the current mayor, who was a previous Democrat Party candidate as well, may run as an independent. So he will potentially be up against some other serious contenders, but he's still the favourite to win. And so that would be bloody exciting, and we will certainly be watching.
Yeah.
Gotham. Have you seen what Batman is up against in Gotham and what the guy running for mayor is up against? That's what it reminds me of. They're taking Wall Streeters and make him walk out onto the ice in the East River and hope, and then they fall through. Yep. I mean, there is a class warfare that's going.
So what's happened here, I think,
is the rich type.
There's a division within the Democrats.
Shall we get into the meat of the show?
Yes.
We wanted to talk about Toilet Paper Australia, the work that you have been doing through TPA, and maybe I will just start with the question, particularly for those who are less online. What is TPA or Toilet Paper Australia?
Yeah, so Toilet Paper Australia, we're a satirical meme page, commentary. It's actually hard to describe kind of what we are.
It is. That's why I was going to get you to do it.
Yeah, we do commentary through dry humour and just straight up presentation of what's going on. We're very direct with what we do. Yeah, we're across most social media platforms. And to be honest, we started as a joke on Facebook. Like, I was bored in the Melbourne lockdown. So I'm from Melbourne, Naarm, and of course, the lockdowns of 2020, quite long, and they were, quite strict. So I didn't really have much to do. I'm, really into football. I coach, and at the time I used to be quite involved on field, and that, of course, wasn't on. So I had a lot of time on my hands on weeknights and weekends, which would have been spent, out in the track or out in the field. And basically just started posting anonymously. I was really pissed off with how politics was being covered. I always had been kind of really just thinking that it's missing something direct, and it's kind of missing just straight up saying things for what it is. So I kind of just was posting, so it's either satirical fake quotes, like in the taking the piss out of, the Turning Point USA style of quotes, but
is
for
that
Australian
what it's based
context.
On? That's why it's TPA.
Yes.
Okay,
it is. The logo is very, very similar. I have made hopefully enough alterations to it, but to avoid any litigation. Yeah, it was started off as fake quotes. Then gradually I just started caring more and more about it. Like, it just, started becoming a lot more of a serious thing. Then, of course, the elections started to come in, and of course, Scott Morrison got the boot, and it just kind of grew into what it is now, which is sort of a commentary. It's mainly just my thoughts written down, and like, I don't know, people often think that, people have a lot of preconceptions about us. Honestly, I barely even think that deeply sometimes into it. And sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. So it's, and that's the nature of shit posting. So it just kind of grew into this, and I kind of felt more of a responsibility with more followers. And now we're sitting at, 83,500 followers on Instagram, and about sort of just under 25,000 on Facebook, and across a few other platforms as well. We're in the sort of several thousands. So we've created a pretty big community. Instagram's our sort of primary base and our primary platform. So that's sort of where we've grown. And we do just a lot of pro-progressive, anti-liberal party content. And I think that's sort of where we are. We're principally anti-liberal, and if we're going to be pro anything, I'd like to say pro-union. Sometimes people may see that as coming across as pro-Labor. I understand that. But I've always been
wouldn't
sort
say
of...
that. I think a lot of listeners to this show wouldn't see Labor as pro-union.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess I always describe it as, if you're against the Liberals, I'm probably going to like you. If you're against One Nation, I'm probably going to like you. So it's why we've had a good relationship with the Greens. We've had a good relationship with some of the Teal Independents as well. More because I'm just sort of like, I see the good that you're doing for your electorate and your demographic, and some of them aren't going to represent the same people. So I was just kind of like, let's just get something, to work together, because if there's one thing, us on, I guess, the self-described left is better at than being progressive, it's fighting amongst each other. And I was just like, let's just be friends. Let's just find something that we can work together on. We can argue what we like, but if once every 3 years we tell the Liberals to fuck off, that's enough for me.
Well, and pretty successfully did that, I think. I mean,
exactly
in
right.
the most recent
Yeah.
election. Yeah.
So yeah, that's more or less TPA in a like very oversimplified nutshell.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we've spoken on Serious Danger a fair bit, and I've had conversations with people, especially over the last few months, about this growing consensus on the left that the mainstream or the traditional media is really not fit for purpose and is actually in many ways an obstacle to progressive change, particularly transformative change that will really improve ordinary people's lives. Is that something, is that part of the motivation for starting, I guess, a quote unquote alternative media platform, as some people might present it?
Absolutely, because they've created this consensus, and I think it's always been like this since Menzies started way back in the 40s, but especially I think I've always been of the opinion that John Howard was kind of Reagan and Thatcher. Maybe I'm not necessarily about policies, though they do line up quite a bit, but they also changed the consensus around what the media says and what the media does and who they back and the ideas they back. And there's just a set of ideas basically ever since in my lifetime, ever since Howard left, that kind of the media really sort of talk about. They're very they promote a very sort of individualistic, selfish mindset around Australians. They talk about issues from a way that is incredibly selfish. It's the I've got mine, so fuck you, basically mindset. And we're not really talking about, well, how is this like, how are the things we're talking about going to benefit other people? And of course, the second we do that, there's always distractions. There's always culture wars. There's always those sorts of little bits and bobs, the meaningless stuff, right, that just is used to distract. And the media loves jumping on that, especially lately. But I really think they've always been like this. But I think especially gradually, ever since Howard left, maybe becoming more openly so. And then maybe it's easier to point out, I guess. And the advent of the start of the internet and the start of social media really helped us call this out. I think it was really easy for the media to bury something in an archive before social media, but now we can see what's going on in the Daily Telegraph and see them praising Gladys Berejiklian, for example, in lockdowns, but doing the same thing that they criticised Dan for. And it's just like, well, this isn't adding up. And you're right, it's not fit for purpose. And I think social media and groups like us, we're just trying to, we're trying to level the playing field, I guess.
Yeah, and a lot of the, degradation, I guess, of the quality of traditional media, it's driven by financial imperative. It is driven by the need to maximize clicks and that sort of thing. But at the same time, in trying to appeal to just what is going to get the most eyes on this thing, ironically, they are losing the ability to effectively reach the majority of people and a growing majority of people with basic information, factual information about what is happening in politics or even just in the world that might affect their lives. And we spoke a little bit about this off mic, that you have this interest in political communication for people who don't usually engage with politics. And arguably that's something that, traditional media is doing less and less effectively. So how do you think, or how do you approach that project of trying to reach people who maybe have just switched off and are not getting it from traditional media?
Yeah, this is really interesting because you've actually got to, there's lots of different things that I do. The first thing, and this is actually something that we've spoken again off mic about, is that no one in TPA works in politics. None of us will. And it's a requirement of coming to join us that you basically virtually have no political experience. The way I see it is the only way that you can understand what an average person is thinking, the way to talk to an average person is you've got to have people who are politically engaged but are not involved in the space. I come from a background in microbiology.
Yeah.
I now work in clinical research. My co-host is a psychology student. And of course, my producer worked in radio and everything. And my graphic designer is a graphic designer.
Yeah.
But, he runs a Pilates studio out in Country Vic. So it's a very, the way I would describe it is you're only going to be able to understand what the average person is thinking by interacting with them every day. And I feel like politics in Australia, all over the world, but I think Australia is no exception to it. It's a very insular space. It is incredibly insular. And I always find that there's a lot of gatekeeping in Australian political discussion. I've actually been told only once or twice, why are you talking about politics? You don't have a politics degree. And I'm like, this was in uni. I'm thinking, what the fuck? What are you talking about? It's like, and I've just found that sometimes the conversation, and maybe to an extent in progressive spaces, can be, for the average person, it's way too highbrow. Like, and this is something that I think, you know, the tabloids do quite well. They're incredibly direct and they reach people at their level. And at the end of the day, if you're going to ask someone to read a book about conflict theory, or if you want them to read about Das Kapital, they're not going to. They're not. I don't. Like,
no. Yeah.
It's sort of like if I had to read a scientific journal to understand how my vaccine worked before I took it, or before the antibiotics took it, I'd probably be dead. I'd be dead by now. And I see them in the same light. So you've got to think, and you've got to interact, and you've got to be around the average person to sort of phrase things in a way and talk to people in a way that they would understand. If I have to see the word rhetoric one more fucking time in a post, it's the one thing that does my head in. It's just like, I'm not reading that. That's just word vomit, man.
Got to make you switch off. Yeah.
Exactly. And the second thing is, what better way to show people what you want to tell them than by just showing them straight up? My best content in the election, and our best content in the election, it wasn't the think pieces, it wasn't the tweets. They helped a lot. But oftentimes it was just side-by-side articles, or just showing a policy, or just showing them something that, like an unedited video of Peter Dutton doing something. And it's just like, like I copped a few comments going, oh, but that's obvious. We already know this. It's like, yeah, we know this, but does your neighbor who works in middle management in a consultancy firm, who lives in suburban southeast Melbourne in like Bentley or something like that, do they know? Probably not. They don't care about politics. You've got to put it in front of people's faces. They don't need to be a political intellectual. They don't need to organize. And that's another, we can go into what the word organize means all day long, but at the end of the day, they just have to vote. They just have to vote. And if they're being reached in a way that they understand, in language that they understand, because we're interacting with them, because we're not really involved in politics, well, then they're going to understand, and they just need to vote at the end of the day. They just need to have that 5 seconds in the booth, just putting the Liberals last, and that's your job done. So I think politics really needs to be simplified. Communication needs to be straightforward. It needs to be direct. It doesn't need to be, it doesn't necessarily lack nuance or, shades of grey, but you've just got to be direct with people. If I have to read an essay, if I have to read a 3,000-word Substack on why Donald Trump's rhetoric is harmful for geopolitics in the Middle East, I'm not going to read it. But if I see Peter Dutton bad because he make things expensive, I know exactly what I'm going to believe, and I'm going to be like, oh, that sucks. Hey. And that's all you need. You just need the app. Yeah. And that's sort of the gist of what we do is just keeping things simple, keeping things presentable in a way that the normal person understands, because I'd like to think that we interact with the normal person and the average apolitical person every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a fine line to walk, because I also think we run the risk then of implying, or people go, oh, you're saying you need to talk down to the average person, or, they're really dumb and they won't get it unless you super, super simplify it for them. But I also think that's this erroneous, this false kind of conflation of something being super complex with being more right or important or valuable. And actually, if you need a 3,000-word essay to justify your political position, maybe you should be questioning it a little bit, because I think that actually is one of the most vastly misunderstood things about, left politics, is that actually it is quite simple and it is quite popular. It is inherently appealing to things that most people agree with. And if you can directly get that information to the average person, they'll go, yep, makes sense.
Exactly.
So that's the thing. It's I don't think necessarily, I think the thing is, you can kind of go, oh, the tabloids do this well in speaking to ordinary people. But at the end of the day, the tabloids treat their readers like fucking idiots. Yeah. And that's what we need to not do, I think, when we're trying to reach people in political communication. The only other thing I would say is we may disagree on whether people just need to go and vote, because on the one hand, I'm like, yes, I get that that's maybe all people feel they have the capacity to do right now, and that's totally better than nothing. But I also think that if we really want to kind of build a movement that's going to make genuine change, then you're going to need to get people on board beyond just one day of every 4 years of voting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the way I would describe it is in terms of how the message needs to be simple. Karl Marx, he was around in the 1800s. The Bible is, several hundred pages long. The Communist Manifesto was 30.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be, it's like he is, the person that formed like communism in and of itself. And it's just like, that is only 30 pages long.
For a reason. Yeah. Like it's designed to be handed around to everyone at a workplace.
And because he was working at the time with workers who probably weren't as highly educated. They may have often only had some basic schooling, if any. So he knew who his audience was. It was workers. It was, 1800s equivalent of tradies. And that's sort of the way that I sort of go about it. And we've also, I think one thing that maybe I should say as well, like sure, voting is really good, but one thing we often say is in our posts is have discussions, ask yourself this, talk to your family about this, tell your mate who's thinking about voting Liberal this. When you tell someone to organise, they don't know what the fuck that means.
Yeah, that's true.
And like I see that so many times, and it's like, what does I don't even know what that means.
Collectivise. The average person's going to be like, huh?
I don't know what that means either. It's like, I don't know, like get an Excel spreadsheet going. I don't know. But I think the thing that I think is really effective is tell them something that they can understand and that they can do just right away. Because at the end of the day, where are they seeing your post? They're scrolling on their phone. They're probably just having a day off or they're on their lunch break. Can they go, oh, hey, look at this? And then
or share to their story.
And that's the discussion started. And then you can start talking about these things. Or you can, exactly. Like our audience that's probably the other thing that we get is some people say, oh, well, it's a shame you're posting this because you're not reaching people who disagree with you. We're doing this as much for our followers as it is for the 100 followers that they have.
Oh, yeah.
We're preaching to the choir, but the choir has a job. The choir has a day job. The choir goes home. The choir's not in where is the choir Monday to Saturday? And Sunday they're in the pews. So, we're not necessarily just reaching our followers. We're reaching the 100 people that they have. And, in the election, we reached just over 3 million people. So that's about close to 1 in 5 voters in Australia.
Yeah.
And our audience is 97% from Australia as well, and almost exclusively over 18. So we were reaching people really, really, across a broad spectrum of people. Once you're reaching 3 million people, that's not just Labor voters, that's not just Greens voters, that's someone who does not care about politics. So I think if you're encouraging conversation, if your content encourages conversation, and inclusive conversation as well, don't discourage someone just because they're new, just because they're not necessarily agreeing with you just yet. Get them there. That's on you.
Yeah, or they don't have the right language.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a you have to guide them there, and it is frustrating. It is very frustrating. I took my parents from being Howard Battlers to voting Labor, actually, or at least putting the Liberals last. And now they rotate between Labor and the Greens basically, every election. So it's not a overnight process, and it can be quite Labor intensive, but you're going to get so much work out of it, and you're going to get so much reward out of it. And who knows, maybe they can talk to their friends and the process repeats itself.
I think, I really relate to that kind of theory of change. And I think it's what I've seen, like volunteering with and working with the Greens for a long time. People come to volunteer with the Greens, or they want to get involved in the Greens, and they're just, what so many people are really hungry for is a few bits of information or a few talking points, things that they can share with their circle to start these conversations. Like they are really desperate for that, for a way that they can have really simple one-on-one conversations with people. And similarly, like that, I think is a huge, like we don't do this podcast, Tom and I, thinking that we are going to reach people and swing their votes. Like there are a few people who said that maybe they've shifted their vote over the time of listening to the podcast, but primarily we want to present to people who are, as you said, we're preaching to the choir, people who are on board and want to know the facts so that they are equipped to have conversations with their networks. And like often people have said, like they find it helpful for them when they go out and door knock, if they're door knocking for the Greens during a campaign, or if they're just talking to people Like I know multiple people who, maybe have more conservative friends or colleagues, and having that information is helpful for them. So I think you're right. It's like we may not necessarily be able to supplant the role of traditional media just yet and be the direct source of information upon which every Australian is basing their decisions, their political decisions and their viewpoints. But we can put more information out there for the people who are switched on to take and disperse.
Exactly. And that's the whole thing that I'm like, well, when I see someone, be like, oh, well, you need to read this. I'm like, no, you're the activist. That's your job. Like you're out here raising awareness for an issue. So it's your job to talk to them and convince them. So I think, and I think it's just our role as activists is to give people a toolkit to use.
Yeah.
And when you're giving someone a toolkit, for example, on a work site, you're not giving them instructions on how to smelt a spanner. You give them the spanner. You're not giving them instructions on how to build a drill. You give them the drill. You give them the thing that's ready made and ready to use.
Yeah.
It's why for me, I give them voting records. I don't give them the parliamentary procedure.
Yeah, that was a big part of your content, hey?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, well, I mean, that's what politicians do, right? And we should be looking at what politicians do. I don't care if Albo, can't name the cash rate off the top of his head, like what happened in 2022. I care about whether or not HAF is providing returns, but also I care whether or not he's actually voting to put things in place. And maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But then if he's not, well, I mean, Greens did pretty good on that. So that's why I like putting together not only things about what the Liberals are doing, but how Labor and the Greens are kind of similar. And it's like, well, if you feel let down by Labor, I mean, you can kind of go to the Greens if you want, because they're kind of doing the thing that you want them to do. So I think there's no better way than about, showing what a politician does than by showing people what they do.
Just showing them what they do. Pretty simple.
And I think it's just so basic. And we, I think in the political space, assume that other people know this, but also it's like, they probably don't. Let's be honest. The average person doesn't, and they don't really care. So you've got to make them care.
Yeah.
And you've got to make them understand.
Yeah.
And that's the big one. Make them understand and make them care.
Yeah. Yeah. Just quickly, speaking of places that ordinary people aren't, I am no longer on Twitter/X. I feel like a lot of people have moved off it, but you probably for your sins are still kicking around. What's going on over there? Anything interesting? What's the Twitter X report?
So the thing is, like, I use Twitter because it's got a good posting format. I think it works a little bit better than Blue Sky. Yeah, it works a little bit better than Blue Sky, and that's the only reason I use it is because the format hasn't been played around with even after Elon took over, and for me, it actually works. If Blue Sky, switched, I know the black works really well for us. It's a bit of symbolism. We like putting things in black and white. We're very monochrome with how we do it, so it doesn't really fit our content color with Blue Sky, but it is. Don't go there. I used to go there a lot because all the journalists were on it, right? And in the scientific world, all the scientists are on it because that's where a lot of the papers and a lot of the conferences were. So that's kind of how I got, clued into politics because I got recommended a few things here and there. But ever since Elon took over, I remember one specific day, sometime in 2023 when the algorithm changed.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I wasn't even getting pro-liberal content. I yearn for the days when I got Rita Panahi tweets. Like, at least it was something that was happening in Australia that kind of mattered.
Yeah, no, it's just weird American blue checks.
Yeah, it's weird American blue checks and just Australians that wish we were annexed by America. Like that, I've literally seen that. I've literally seen people say that. And it's just these blue checks that mysteriously can somehow pump out 74 tweets a day. Like I've done the maths. It's like they're on like 100,000 tweets. I'm like, get a fucking hobby. Or also they're probably a bot, let's be honest.
Yeah.
But it's just like, it's so disconnected from what's going on. Like they're talking about, I don't know, they're talking about a trans netball play. Like, let them live their fucking life. Let them live their life. They're happy, right?
Yeah.
But also, why do I care that they're happy and they're playing sport? Or they're talking about I don't know, drag queen story time. It's like drag queens are fucking lovely, man. Like, why do you care so much?
Please relax.
It's just the most irrelevant culture war stuff that's just putting people down for being who they are.
Yeah.
And they'll always weaponize the most vulnerable people in the community. So obviously, people who don't identify with the gender binary, who identify with these sorts of communities, they always, put them in the firing line for cheap outrage. And it's always immigration they'll go after as well. They'll always go after the immigrants. Like my family, my mum came from Malaysia.
Mm-hmm.
So it sort of hits me a little bit. You know, my dad's side of the family is from Southern Europe after World War II. So, you know, I come from a family of migrants and seeing that, and I'm just like, they are some of the hardest working people you'll ever meet. You guys are just doing this to stir up a fuss. And of course, now they're going after a lot of like Palestinians, and it's like it's just such a cesspit on Twitter because they're just going after these people who are just trying to live. They're literally just trying to live, and you know, to an extent, keep their culture alive as well. It's just every time I see something like that, and every time I see, like, for example, there'll be a terrorist attack, I know those people are happy that happened. And that's what makes me so pissed off. And I try not to engage with it on Twitter because it's just like, they're just doing it for outrage, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's Twitter's it's an interesting one. It's one that I'm going to stay away from, you know, I guess regularly, properly engaging with. I just make posts that it's there so I can screenshot and put it on.
Close app.
Yeah, literally post, screenshot, crop, close app. It's literally like I'm just chucking a grenade over the top.
Duck behind the wall.
Yeah, exactly. Duck behind the wall and let the trolls lose it. I love kicking the hornet's nest there, but yeah. It's unless you want to post rage bait there, like stay away.
Yeah.
The delicate truce in the Middle East is still intact now as it enters a third day. NATO leaders meeting in the Netherlands praising Donald Trump's negotiation tactics.
Like two kids in a schoolyard, you know, they fight like hell. You can't stop them. Let them fight for about 2-3 minutes, then it's easier to stop them.
And then Daddy has to sometimes use strong language to get stop.
Yes, he said daddy.
Well, okay, you mentioned people who want Australia to be annexed by the US. That's probably a neat segue into our next discussion. Of course, okay, I'll lay it out for everyone. As a geopolitical expert, key events this week, since last weekend. So following Israel and Iran, they exchanged a bunch of strikes, missiles.
Yes.
On Sunday, the US bombed 3 Iranian nuclear facilities in Fordow, Natanz and Isfahan. I did get a little bit distracted just quickly looking at the bomb that they used, the bunker buster, this like insane bombing device. Yeah, that's like designed to evade radars because it's a funny shape and you can't see it. And it has drops these enormous bombs that can go way underground. And that's how they targeted the nuclear facilities. But that's an aside. You know, military equipment is not cool. It's not cool. We don't support it. So they did that. That's on Sunday-ish. It's hard because of the time zones. But Monday, Tuesday, Australia time, Iran responded with a strike on a US base in Qatar, which reportedly they probably warned them about anyway, although Qatar was still not very happy about it, you know, effectively being used as a pawn for this like way out, this kind of exit plan for Iran and the US. They said it was violating their sovereignty. Then on Tuesday, Trump announced Iran and Israel have agreed on a ceasefire deal, even though at the time they were like, no, we haven't. That lasted all of a few hours when it ultimately came into effect. And then he solved it by being, quote, daddy. Is that, I've got everything? That's the week in review?
Yeah, that's the most modern geopolitics sequence of events I could think of.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Yeah, I mean, close enough. Welcome back, George W. Bush, for Donald Trump.
Yes, truly. It's deja vu, isn't it? They're developing a big, scary bomb and weapon, and we have to bomb them because of it. And Australia's right on board, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, and that's the thing I'm sort of really, really disappointed about, which we'll touch on in a bit. But it's sort of it's interesting because I think Netanyahu can obviously see, you know, if he doesn't do this, he's done. And he's in a lot of trouble, I know, domestically from the little I know of what's going on in the Middle East. But it's all a distraction. And for Trump, it's a nice, convenient distraction after the whole Trump and Elon falling out and, you know, a lot of his mandate kind of falling through the floor. I think there are a lot of things, and geopolitics is incredibly complicated. I'm not, you know, as well versed in international politics, but obviously seeing what's going on. It's interesting. I think, you know, obviously Iran has been a the backer, I believe, of Hamas, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't know, maybe he's using that as an excuse. I think he's maybe using it as a distraction. But also I think, Israel has always had intentions of wanting to expand beyond what they currently have right now.
Yes.
And they do that by, as we joke about, creating a buffer zone for a buffer zone for a buffer zone. Just we need one more buffer zone, bro. I swear, bro.
One more buffer zone, yeah.
And it really sucks, right? Like it's just, it's like it. The problem is like the West, of course, gives them a free pass because there is the narrative that criticizing the Israeli government is anti-Semitic, which is not true. I mean, like if if I criticize the Saudi government, that doesn't make me Islamophobic. That just means I don't like the Saudi government. I don't like what the Crown Prince is doing. So why? And that's the thing that really frustrates me and really annoys me is we have, and this is another thing about the media as well, because the media is also quite on board with this, and it really frustrates me because there's so little, or makes people feel, there's a lot we can do, but it makes us feel powerless in the moment. And I think the US, and of course the US getting involved is just the dying empire trying to have one last shot at glory, I think.
Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of people, I feel like at the end of this week, a lot of the commentary is, wow, Donald Trump has totally come out looking like a king, boss, legend.
No.
He's fixed everything and he's so amazing and so smart you wouldn't even possibly understand the 5D chess that he's playing. So I want to get to that. I want to get to that. But maybe first I want to talk about the response to the US bombings in particular, because we know by now, like, Israel has effectively shown that they just have apparently total impunity to do whatever the fuck they want, break as many international laws as they want, and everyone in the West will just let them get away with it, it seems. It seems. But the US is, has got involved. Initially Trump was sort of saying, I'll make a decision within the next 2 weeks as to whether the US gets involved, but clearly then moved well before 2 weeks, went ahead and bombed these uranium enrichment sites in Iran, which international lawyers, to be clear, foreign policy experts all overwhelmingly say these bombings are illegal under international law. They're illegal under the UN Charter, which says that countries can only use force to defend themselves against armed attack, not in anticipation of a hypothetical attack. This argument that, Iran is going to develop a nuclear weapon is not sufficient justification in itself anyway to justify an attack, putting aside the fact that international assessments have found no evidence that Iran has an active nuclear weaponization program, and it's a signatory to the UN's Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the fact that, by the way, Israel is not a signatory to that treaty and is widely believed to possess nuclear weapons itself. So, you have this situation where, like, all the experts are saying, okay, the US has breached international law, which has probably been facilitated in no small part by the fact that Israel has, through its actions in Gaza over the last 2 years or so, significantly eroded trust and respect for international law by just completely disregarding it. But the only people in Australian politics, well, except maybe Jackie Lambie kind of to some extent, but the Greens are the only ones really out there consistently saying that's, listen to international law. This is illegal. It's a threat to world peace, and Australia should be distancing itself from the US attacks, cutting ties, closing US bases like Pine Gap. Is it not bizarre that the Greens are the only ones willing to stand on the side of, like, all of the international law,
Exactly. And I think it's really frustrating because they're like, I mean, we saw what happened with Fatima Payman, right?
Yeah.
And it's quite disappointing that, something as simple as, just saying, hey, this isn't a very good thing is such a controversial thing.
For Labor, yeah. Yeah,
it's such a controversial thing. Like, it should be something very simple, even just to say it's wrong, like the bare minimum actually wouldn't cause that much consequence. And I wish Labor would, I really wish they just realise that you're not going to get any blowback from this. Everyone realises this is wrong. And the Greens, I have a lot of respect for because they've suffered electorally as a result of, well, to an extent. Obviously, there were a few other things that may have played into it. But as a result, like, standing up to Israeli government lobby And I'm very specific about saying that the lobby for that government.
Yeah.
Because they were like, we're willing to, we don't care if we win or lose as long as we do the right thing here.
On the right side of history.
Exactly. And I have a great degree of respect for that, because you're giving up, like, you know, a position of privilege, being a member of parliament or being in office to stand up for people who really are suffering right now. And it's strange that, you know, the Greens aren't as well resourced as the major parties either. And the fact that they're still kicking and they're still surviving, well, if they can do that, well, imagine how well resourced and how survivable Labor would be if they actually stood up to this. And this is what really frustrates me. It's actually not, it's made out to be a very difficult thing, and it can be, but I really think there are things that they can do that are well within their control to stand up to Israel and like sort of pro-Israeli media that really wouldn't, you know, take that much effort or really have that much negative consequence. I think people would just really appreciate that.
Yeah. This is the question I keep coming back to, that it's like, what role exactly does Australia play? How much power do we have? And of course, it seems to change depending on what point you want to make. I mean, I thought it was interesting, like Albanese's response. So what happened with these US strikes is on the Sunday, the initial response from the initial response from the government, including Richard Marles, was to kind of just equivocate. They didn't condemn the US strikes. They didn't back them. They called for de-escalation, dialogue and diplomacy, not peace. They wouldn't call for peace, of course.
Yeah.
But then the next day, Penny Wong is on ABC radio and she says, quote, "The world has agreed Iran cannot be allowed to get a nuclear weapon. So yes, we support action to prevent that. And that is what this is," referring to the US strikes on Iran.
It's the one thing you can't say.
Yeah.
That was the one thing you shouldn't have said, and she said it. That's what frustrated me.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, then in response to, you know, media kind of rightly say, "Oh, that's interesting. Why has your position changed? Why has the government's position changed from yesterday?" And there have been varying responses to this. You know, Penny Wong saying, "Oh, well, you were talking to the Deputy Prime Minister yesterday and now you're talking to me. So I'm a different person." But clearly the government's position has changed. Albanese's response to this, as to why they didn't kind of respond more quickly to either back or condemn the US, was, well, Australia isn't really a central player in this. But then at the same time, the government is super quick to condemn Iran's retaliatory strike on the US base in Qatar. So it changes, right, depending on who is involved and what the circumstances are as to whether Australia can or can't act quickly.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think we can kind of do what we can. It doesn't really matter whether it's a lot or insignificant. Like, I really feel like you just kind of do. Like, you just have to do what you can to condemn whatever's going on. And I really find it bizarre that the Penny Wong takes really just the stock standard US position. It's just, I always wonder, why is Iran, who is part of a nuclear non-proliferation treaty, who at this stage currently doesn't have nukes, but according to Netanyahu has for the last 30 years been months away from developing a nuclear bomb.
Always,
I mean, he
months
said
away.
it since 1996. I mean, the hardest part apparently, according to Netanyahu, about Iran developing a nuke within 6 months is the first 20 years. At this point, like, being completely real. And well, why is it not okay for Iran to have them, but Israel to have them? And in this case, Israel is a very clear aggressor in this current escalation of conflict with Iran. Yeah. And it's just so strange, and also, and again, equal parts frustrating to see that this is an issue, and, you know, that they're willing to side with the US. And then again, Albo saying that we're not, you know, a significant player in this, but, well, we obviously are to condemn someone. So, like, why?
Yeah. If you're going to take a position one way or the other, and of course they do that after, like, you look at the significant, I mean, the imperialist like framing is just so strong, not just from the coalition, obviously, who come out straight away and back the US as expected, and because Iran are all terrorists and everything, but even listening, like, I was in the gym and Channel 9 was playing one of these mornings, and the way that they just, as though it's complete fact, will just state, well, you know, Iran being one of the most the key kind of aggressors of or perpetrators of terrorism across the world, and so everyone would agree that they're a significant threat and cannot be allowed to have nuclear weapons. They just state that as fact, and they are the ones who were then, they were pushing and pushing on the government.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, as we see on so many issues, Labor goes, oh, okay, yeah, we agree. We back the US. It's so weak.
Yeah. And I think there needs to be some sort of a deconditioning. It's like the US isn't as strong as what it used to be. You probably can push them a lot more. You can probably push their buttons a lot more. When I heard that Trump didn't even know what AUKUS was, I was just like, that is one of the biggest military deals in a US context as well. It's obviously one of our biggest, but it's pretty big in a US context as well. And it's like, if they want to get rid of it, well, then obviously they don't really care that much about us and how we sit in the sphere of influence. And I think, I mean, sure, Albo may be worried about getting Whitlamed, but like it's just, you've probably got a chance now to do a lot more because the US doesn't really care about us all that much anymore.
Yeah. Well, and that's an open question though, right? Is like, how much does the US need us? And this is the thing that is still lying below a real shroud of secrecy and a lack of transparency. And I think the calls for more transparency on the US-Australian relationship, and specifically the use of US assets, US bases in Australia, and exactly what that relationship entails, that arrangement entails. The calls for transparency around that are really kind of reaching fever pitch, it feels, at the moment. Not only from, the Greens, obviously, I think have this real renewed focus on US bases in Australia, and with good reason. I've seen David Shoebridge talking about this a lot, talking about Pine Gap and really pushing on, was Pine Gap intelligence or was Pine Gap assisting the US in this operation in Iran, which is a question that was put to the government, and they repeatedly there's that clip of Albanese just repeatedly saying it was unilateral strikes by the US, it was unilateral action by the US, it was unilateral, kind of implying but without actually answering it.
They've got their stuff here. They've got their toys in Pine Gap, and it's sort of like it can be unilateral because they own all the shit in Pine Gap. So, of course, it can be unilateral because they don't need to involve us because all their stuff is here. So you can say it's unilateral if you launch a strike from a US military base. Well, the US military base is part of America, but it's in another country. And Pine Gap obviously is from what I know, it's it's a listening station, I think it is, or it's a US base that gathers intelligence. And it's sort of like, well, of course, they can say that it's unilateral and they can say that it was just the US, but if it happens in Pine Gap and no Australian gets involved, it still counts as unilateral, even though it's happening on Australian soil because they own the real estate there.
Yes, and that's kind of the point. And like the Greens are pointing this out in terms of, isn't it a little bit fucked up that we're just allowing the US to station their base here, and yet we have do we have veto rights over actions? Do we what is the obligation of Australian troops and the Australian government in terms of any military action that the US is taking using Pine Gap or other military bases in Australia? We're saying that from the perspective of, well, we think that particularly under Donald Trump, the US is like an aggressor. It's a country that is a threat to global peace, and Australia shouldn't be maintaining these strong ties with them. But then you also have people from, for example, Andrew Hastie from the Coalition on the other side, who may be in support of the imperialist project and the US, but is also calling for more transparency on Pine Gap and US operations. He was saying, so he says, quote, in the media this week, when America conducts combat operations, we want to know what our level of involvement will be. I think if we're going to have this close friendship going forward, it's really important to understand exactly what that means. So even if you want a friendship, you're like, but can we get some details? Can we get some information?
Yeah. Exactly, and it's the fact that even if Andrew Hastie is saying that, and, Andrew Hastie is a veteran as well, and I think he knows about what goes on in the armed forces probably more than I do. As much as I may disagree with his policies, he's probably very clued in that aspect. And I think, if he's saying we need more transparency, I actually think that would be pretty alarming because, as we know, the Liberals aren't all that big on transparency. So if they're asking for it, I think we probably should want to know a bit more.
Yeah. Do you think we will get to some sort of parliamentary debate on the role of the US military on Australian soil, or what that looks like and more transparency?
Not in the current parliament, no.
Okay.
I wish. I wish my answer wasn't as flat out as that. And it should be. It should be a lot more. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem like if the leader of the Labor Party isn't doing it, when they've got 94 seats. I don't think the other 93 are going to. The coalition, of course, won't. And I just think, unfortunately, with less Greens, that makes it less likely for the conversation to happen, unfortunately. Yeah. Maybe Bob Carter will go on a rant at some point. I think he will. But, it'll be hard to in this one. I do think it's an inevitability that it will, however. It will be debated at some point, and it will be a serious talking point at one point. I just think right now it's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's where I should say I briefly mentioned this before, that Jackie Lambie has at least been on the right side of this. You know, Jackie Lambie sometimes has some really good things to say. And similarly, this week she was out there absolutely lambasting Albanese. She said Australia, quote, should not be supporting action because Trump has not played by the rule book in unilaterally bombing Iran without warning. She said, quote, it is the lamb following the lamb here. She's talking about Albanese. What Trump did was wrong. You are bending over to Trump already. I find it shameful. Start standing up to the man. He is a bloody sociopath. Mm-hmm. Go off, I would say.
Jackie Lambie, I like her. She's good. Yeah. She's a good one.
So at the time of recording, the ceasefire, that we're recording this on Friday morning, the ceasefire between Israel and Iran is holding. And like I said, a lot of people are saying, oh, this shows Donald Trump. He negotiated this. He made it happen. He's a master of the deal. This is because he's such a good businessman, etc. I saw some of the insane. Did you see some of the things that he was posting on like his Truth Social thing and stuff immediately after announcing this? And it's like this weird stretched out photo of him in a suit, and it just says like peace through strength. Yeah. And he's like, I did it. I
didn't see that one. Was it like AI slop as well?
Probably. Yeah, probably. That actually makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, I hate to see that.
Yeah.
Good God.
I mean, it's truly, it has been, and it's like, I hate that still, no matter how long he is in the public sphere, the Trump stuff still manages to surprise me and make me laugh. Like it is unique. Like his absolute bizarreness truly is unique. Like I guess the cat is similar thing. But like, yes, the way that he presented this ceasefire, and then of course what, made real waves, I guess, was after it was breached by, well, allegedly Iran, but Israel and Iran. And he comes out and drops the quote-unquote F-bomb. He says, you've got two countries who've been fighting each other for so long, they don't know what the fuck they're doing.
Yeah.
Kind of trying to be like, when you've got two school kids in the or two kids in the playground at school, and you just have to let them fight, and then you pull them apart, and it's all good once the ceasefire had kind of resumed. And then he positions himself as this like parent figure almost, being like, I'm gonna solve it. And also I think there's an element there of, someone said to me what he's trying to do there when he's saying, well, Israel, don't you bloody breach it, like, or I'm gonna come down hard on you, is surely an attempt to maintain this illusion that he doesn't control, he has no influence over what Israel does, for when they inevitably, bomb the shit out of Iran, that he can go, oh, well, I tried to stop them. And he's got the NATO chief, former Dutch PM, was it Mark Rutte?
Mark Rutte, I think, yeah.
Rutte, yeah. Praising him, saying you've achieved something no American president could do before. Daddy sometimes has to use strong language, he said. Which Trump loves. Trump's like, he said, I'm his daddy. I'm everyone's daddy. Fucking depressing, given just like historical context, the position of the US, just historically and in the world.
It's just so strange.
Yeah, it's bleak stuff.
Yeah, makes your skin crawl, really. Like I saw that, I'm like, oh, yeah.
I know. I think everyone's a bit bleh. But then they're like, no, but it's smart positioning, and he looks great, and Trump is so very, very clever. You couldn't possibly understand.
Oh no. Yeah.
Yes. Well, of course, also the other thing that this has done is it's created the perfect platform, for NATO and for all the like pro-war imperialist zealots to say we need to be spending more money on weapons, more money on defense. Every country should be increasing their defense budget to 5% of GDP. The coalition pressing on this. Susan Ley, in her address to the press club this week, was endorsing a higher defence spending budget. The US is demanding Australia lift it, and the government's response is basically just to be like, we're spending as much as we can. We're actually spending heaps on defence.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that seems like a very soft rejection of the US's request for us to spend more money. I don't know. Like, it's sort of one of those things where I'm not really holding my breath on it too much, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, but I think that's one thing that we can do is just at least say no to those sorts of things. You can do it for more. Again, you can say no to a lot more things. If you're willing to say no on military spending to America, you can probably say no to a lot more.
Yeah, practice saying no.
Yep.
Alex Itch-Labour.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't need to have a rubber arm. You don't need to.
Well, I think that's probably all we have time for. We've solved war in the Middle East and correctly discussed all of the correct and good takes on the geopolitical crisis currently unfolding. So we can sign off. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
No
this
worries.
Week, Raushaan. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you very much for having me on. It's always good to talk more about the stuff that we the stuff that we do, the stuff that we discuss, and I've obviously listened to you guys for some time, and seen your reels more specifically. So it's good to jump on and good to share my 2 cents.
Thank you. And yes, is it Toilet Paper Australia is the best place for people to find you and your work? What can people do to?
Toilet Paper Australia on Facebook and Instagram. Same with TikTok as well. We don't do as much there, but we're starting to do a little bit more of. And on Twitter, if you're still kicking around, of course, we do drop some grenades over there, Toilet Paper Oz 1. Please feel free to follow. We also have our own podcast, Talking Shit by Toilet Paper Australia, which will be returning soon. We obviously just took a break after the election, so we'll be getting back in things in the latter half of the year.
Love to hear it. Well, thanks everyone for listening to Serious Danger. Tom and I will, of course, be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, you can support us by following our social media at Serious Danger AU on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. If you want to support the show even more, you can sign up at patreon.com/Serious Danger AU. Otherwise, tell a friend to listen to this episode and have a great week. Hopefully, there's still a ceasefire next time we speak.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Serious Danger Australia.